Jim, thank you for being here. I'm excited to have you on as a guest.
You're welcome. Thanks. Great to be with you.
Yeah, let's dive right into it. I'd love for the audience to hear what got you into the recruiting space.
I wish I had a good answer to that. I literally finished college. My last summer in school, I spent some time out in California. Came back, started bartending, did that for a few months, and started looking around at sales jobs. And I was literally playing golf one day and met up with a couple of guys that owned a group of staffing agencies in New York City. Next thing you know, I was meeting with them in New York, and I sat with them for almost 9 years. Um, and so I learned the business the old-fashioned way with a telephone, a Rolodex.
Mhm.
Really had some great relationships with some of those guys over the years, some of which I still talk to today.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's how I got started.
Yeah. Why? Because I do hear it a lot that everybody in their careers, right? And it's unexpected. It's a new path, and then they end up enjoying it. So why did you stay? Why did you continue doing it? Why do you love it?
Well, I think number one, I'm a competitive person. Number two, um, I'm not very good at a lot of things, let's be honest with you. So when I think of what I was, and I could have probably ended up in Wall Street or something and probably had a relationship job. I've always enjoyed speaking to people. I do get accused of giving oversharing as far as advice or information. So, some
Mhm.
of the conversations, it just gives me energy when I hear people, and whether it's their problems or their challenges. I see it both sides. I mean, companies have problems. I always kind of refer to those as opportunities. And if their problem is a big enough opportunity for somebody, it's going to be a great opportunity for a candidate. And on the other side, candidates have challenges too. So trying to navigate through over the years the various obstacles. The ones today aren't any different than years ago. Years ago, it was people didn't pick up the phone, or they didn't respond to the fax machine, or all those things. And today, it's websites, and I can't submit my cover letter. I can't get through to a decision maker, and so navigating to find out the right person to speak to has been pretty much the same challenge over the years, just in different, in different ways.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean it is a common problem, right? I hear people talking about it all the time of how do I get it to an actual pair of eyes, not just to, a machine that's going to sift me through some applicant tracking system. Um, but I'd love to dive into some candidate struggles and market insights that you're seeing, right? Because you get to see both, right? You get to see what your clients, the employers are looking at, and what candidates are looking at. So you've worked with a lot of different candidates across different, areas, levels of experience.
Right.
What problems or biggest struggles are you seeing candidates facing and in today's job market, and what advice would you give them?
Well, let's start with the company side, because I think a lot of times candidate problems begin and end with the company side, because a lot of hiring managers live in the world of procurement. In other words, Jim, I need or I want, and they'll tell me a story of someone who quit, and it's a critical they find someone to start this job tomorrow. Well, that kind of hiring manager is not prone to laying out a career path for somebody, or investing in someone and growing them and all that other kind of stuff. So invariably, those immediate positions, the ones that appear to be on fire when you see them online, those are real difficult for people who don't have exactly the skill sets. And I try to get candidates to understand that, or at least have this methodology in their head, that if they feel like they're 80% of what a job description is asking for, what those key requirements are, try to identify where that 20% is, or 25% is where they're missing, and then put a timeline next to that as to how long do you think it would take you to come up to speed in those areas. And if you feel like there's a reasonable amount of time, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, why not apply? Why not have a conversation?
Mhm.
While that goes on, when I speak to that hiring manager, I try to walk them away from the procurement mindset and try to get them, well, first understand what their current challenges are. What's the size of their team? Why is this such a critical thing? Is there any time to allow someone to grow in the role. And there are examples when you absolutely have to have 100% of what it is you want. But the times where there's a gap and the person is flexible, then that's when I go to work. That's when I really try to probe on their likes, their dislikes, their must-haves, the things they can live with, the things they can live without. And once you get a good intake meeting like that, and you come away with, as I like to say, where they were and where they are and where they want to get to, then you can properly represent that role. And then it really comes down to finding some kind of cultural fit, finding a person with the right attitude, the right core skill sets. And, I try to remind managers that you're hiring people, you're not buying people. And I know that sounds silly, but believe me, over the years, I would say that the common personality trait when people will call is they want what they want. And that's what I fight against. They want what they want. Well, candidates do the same thing. They want what they want too. And being that person who sees the middle ground and try to bring them together is something I've spent years doing. And it's exhausting at times, but it's really rewarding when it works.
Yeah. I love that, especially because there's two things I really like. One thing that you mentioned that I would love for all of our listeners to hear is if you're an 80% match for the role, don't think you're not qualified, but think of what skill sets you have or you need to get, and then the timeline that you could develop those skill sets necessary to fit that role as a 100% match.
Right.
I really liked that. I thought that was awesome. I think a lot of people get really worried that they're not 100% fit, or they're focusing on how to avoid the questions of why they're not the fit. And in all reality, they could say, "Hey, I've got a solution to the problem, and I'd be a great culture fit for you." So I really enjoy that. And then the second thing you were talking about, oh, I just blanked on it. There was something else you were just talking about there, but do you have something on your mind? You were going to say something.
Well, it's just that, I've also said this all the time. Again, candidates, let's get back to the candidate side for a second.
Mhm.
I get several forms of candidates throughout the week. There are the people that call up because they want to get a sense of the market. There's the person who, like what happened today, call came in, the guy who had previously canceled an interview because he was being converted to full-time just found out that his whole department is getting cut, and he's back in the market, that immediacy. And then there's the person who, especially around the holidays, has been thinking about what they need to do in their career and really wants to have a consultative conversation about what's out there. But the common thing in all three conversations is they have a real difficult time explaining what they want to do or what their objectives are. Because
Mhm.
quite often it's a personal thing, like they need to be closer to their home, or their commute's too bad, or they really don't like their manager, or they're not getting paid enough. Those are the common things. But often they're having a real hard time trying to explain, or just being articulate enough to answer that question, what are you looking to do next in your career? Really struggle with that. Now,
Mhm.
again, I might find that hard to believe, but that's what happens. And I think sometimes when you've been burrowed into a job, into a company for a really long time, it's very, very hard to look beyond that, to think about what I'd like to do next. And it's interesting because I always read this, that today the average 30-year-old can have as many as 6 jobs. And they've had that time to experiment and to see different things, much like a consultant does that hops around to different companies.
Mhm.
When you go to work the way my generation did, you came out, you went to work for Con Edison, for example, or Brooklyn Union Gas, or Chase Manhattan Bank, or whoever it was, you stayed there for the phone company. You stayed there 10, 20 years. That's the way it worked. That's the way your parents did it. Well, over the years now, you see the only way you can really gain additional experience quite often is to move into another company or another role or another. And of course, we've had this whole explosion of the gig economy and people monetizing themselves. And that whole world has allowed people to feel like, you know what, I love designing. You know what, I love creating. I don't want to sit in a cubicle all day long. All of a sudden, they feel more energized and excited. So, again, the the challenges that candidates face sometimes can be alleviated because the market is changing. And yet, as the market changes, the people who've had a hard time changing, they really struggle. So it's sometimes it's a bit of kind of reorganization in terms of getting people to really go through the old-fashioned analysis of strengths and weaknesses, likes and dislikes, and try to prioritize those critical things they have to have, and then figure out in a geographical radius of where they are, is that attainable or not? And of course, then, remote work comes in, hybrid comes in, all of these other variables are really challenging for a lot of people. And sometimes it's just a matter of breaking everything down and getting them to kind of prioritize what's really important to them. And then the next part is to give them some ideas and some suggestions. And I usually use a lot of examples and metaphors to describe how their job search is very much like looking for a house, or, looking for, when they were back in looking for colleges, there's all of those big decisions in life where you have to look at a lot of variables and then make some sacrifices and compromises. And, job search is the same thing, same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And it goes right into the next portion I want to talk about, how you bridge that gap, right? Because you talked about what hiring managers are looking for, and they need to think about hiring a person, right? Bringing on a person, looking for people, not just paying for somebody. But then you also have to focus on the candidate, right? And what the candidate needs, and different things there. So it sounds like you like going a little bit above and beyond, right? Not to make you sound perfect, but I mean, I really like that you go above and beyond and say, hey, how can I help advise this person on what they would need to do, and see what skill sets they have or what they might be lacking, how they could describe themselves in the right way. But why do you like to do it that way? Is there somebody that showed you that, or is that just what you found over the years is the best way to get the best candidate for your client?
Well, there's two approaches. So, for example, as an executive recruiter, I only get paid by a company when I find them the kind of person that they need for that particular challenge that they've got, or that opening they've got. But that doesn't mean I don't have to talk to a lot of candidates. I do. In order to come up with a short list, we've got to have the numbers are sometimes crazy, how many conversations we have to find the 4 to 6 or 5 that we're going to present for, the goal of getting a finalist who's going to start. So in those conversations, you quickly, like anyone does in sales, figure out the level of interest, number one, the fit, number two, and the availability, number three. Those are the 3 categories you have to find out very, very quickly. But I often talk about the people that will reach out through LinkedIn, or they come through a friend or a family referral. Hey, could you speak to this person? And again, whether they're say a 30-year-old who has 1 or 2 jobs and is completely lost, their friends are all, they seemingly are successful, and they're way ahead in the game of life, so to speak, and they're completely lost. That's one conversation. And then we have the person who is maybe 55 to 65, is either forced out of a job or feeling like they have taken early retirement, they need to come back to work, or some kind of category where they're trying to get back into work, but they feel there's age discrimination or some other thing. Anyway, there's many reasons why people will reach out through LinkedIn to speak to a quote recruiter, but I can only really help people from the standpoint of advice and counsel, which I do for free, but I get paid to find the people that companies can't find themselves. So there's that thin line you have to walk. But again, I'm not trying to be perfect. It's just, I don't want to burn a relationship, burn a referral, just because I don't have time necessarily to speak to them. So like everybody, I have to use my judgment as to the time and day, or whether I want to set up some time to speak to that particular candidate. So, everybody is going to get a job. That always happens. And even when they don't think they're going to get a job, they get a job. So today they could be a candidate. Today they could be a prospect. Tomorrow they could be a hiring manager. And I've always kind of taken that approach. And it's been fun because sometimes I'll get a call back from somebody. Do you remember how many years ago you spoke with me about a job at XYZ company. Well, today, I run a division and I'm looking for two people to add to my team. That has happened so many times. And that's the time when I probably smile and say, it was worth it back then. So it might not pay off right away, but sometimes it pays off in other ways down the road.
Yeah. I love that. It's the whole karma thing, right? What goes around comes around. You put out good, you get good, right? And I like that. I do. And I know it's walking a thin line because I'm sure you get a lot of people that want advice. And you don't have 24/7 to just talk
No,
to candidates about advice, but I love that approach. And I'm curious, I'd love to talk more about the 55 to 65 range, right? What do you do? What advice would you give to those people when they're maybe getting pushed out of a company at 58 or at
right.
62, or they're trying to decide what else they want to do, but they're worried about ageism and other things. What advice would you give them?
I first started noticing that trend of people getting pushed out. I would probably say maybe not so much how many years ago, but it was a while back when I started to see a lot of Wall Street people in our community who were, not on the train anymore or trying to work remotely back in the early days pre-COVID, and it was very difficult for them. And I'm talking about people in treasury operations, back office banking, those kinds of things. Anyway,
Hmm.
a lot of them, and even today, they're not aware of this whole gig economy that's out there. And as I tell people, there's as many as 30% of the workforce is working for themselves in some way where they're able to monetize what they do. So I have to kind of look at a person's background. Now, if they come from a STEM background, science, technology, engineering, math, they're going to get a job and they're going to keep working. They don't really care where they are, especially if you're a startup or a young company. They care about your competency. They don't necessarily care about how old you are. And
Hmm.
the more traditional companies are worried more about, tenure and pensions and all those kinds of things. So they're worried about a cost of employee, not necessarily as concerned with the productivity. So anyway, I speak to them about whether or not, if they're not in a particular skill set where I think they're going to get a job quickly, I try to get them to go through the process of evaluating what it is they could monetize about their background, show them a variety of websites where per diem work is available, talk to them about what groups on LinkedIn or what groups that they can uh, join or have joined professionally where people who are extremely busy need help and need to offload some work and figure out a way to get that first or second project under their belt. And it's really worked out really well for a lot of people. I've seen them coming back a lot. And so when when you're looking at their situation, it's just important to take stock. Obviously, some people have really, really difficult challenges, but other people, again, they've been so siloed in their own world. They don't know that there are a lot of people out there who need their expertise. And again, the younger people are freer with sharing their expertise. The more senior people are not as comfortable on social media. They don't like putting themselves out there. They don't like putting together a big bio marketing campaign or something. So again, it's just a question of try to understand, do they have any knowledge of fractional work? Um, are they available for board advisory work, for example? Are they capable of doing any kind of coaching or any kind of consulting work that would hopefully pay pretty good revenue? And do they do any training or anything, any of those things that you could just easily go on any website like Upwork or something and see someone's looking for help in those areas. And once you get into that, whether it's one project or two projects, they start to get some wind in their sails, and all of a sudden they feel like they're contributing, they're back, they're making some money, and quite often those things lead to full-time jobs. So, it's not going to solve the problem of all the engineers that are needed in this country. It's not going to solve the problem of all the people that are retiring and leaving the workforce, but it is going to give companies the opportunity to leverage a lot of expertise and certainly allow people to monetize their retirement years, above and beyond what they get from Social Security.
Yeah. I love that. We've got a lot of clients and listeners that are in that 55 to 65 range, um and I think they're going to love hearing that. And one thing, just a small little side note, I'd love to just get a brief little idea of what you think, because I was just talking to a client about this yesterday, talking to him about it again next week. Board positions. What's the best way that you find? Because I know network is a big part in finding board positions, but what's a simple way that you've found for people to find board roles that aren't in their network?
I get that question all the time because
Mhm.
quite frankly, there's a lot of CEOs and presidents who are looking for something that falls under the banner of work-life balance. They've done the entire career of heavy travel or incredible workload from a hourly work standpoint. They put in the time, so to speak. So they're looking for one of those really profitable board jobs that pay them 250 to $300,000 a year, and they only have to do it certain weeks of the year if they're out there. But you're right, it's a networking game.
Yeah.
The best path through that, of course, is tapping into their network, into the people who are currently CEOs in other companies and getting on their radar. A lot of them have relationships with private equity firms and really have a close proximity to the decision makers that run those portfolio companies. They're the guys who hire the people that hire fractional CEOs and all the various positions like that. They're quite often looking for board people. If you're involved in any kind of academic area, a lot of times the people who are working in high levels in academia, they're also working on boards. They know people. So there isn't a place to go to hang your hat to say, I want a board job, even though there are times when people advertise for it. But in my experience, it's always come word of mouth and somebody was recommended.
Mhm. That's what we see on our end as well. I appreciate that that advice. I think everything you're saying is so on point with what I hear people and our clients talk about all day, every day, right? So I really appreciate your advice, and I'd love to talk about one last thing. You mentioned an opportunity for executives that have, potential CEO type backgrounds. What is that opportunity? What are you looking at for that?
Well, just like there are, and we were just talking about candidates who have a hard time finding that ideal kind of role. Companies quite often have a hard time finding that ideal candidate. And quite often they want to replicate success. They'll say, we have Jane so-and-so or Joe so-and-so, they're doing incredibly well, and their background is this. And their path to success was really, really short. We didn't have to do it. Anyway, that whole process is something that is easy to talk about, but it's very difficult to deliver on. But one of the sectors that we work is in the consulting arena, and there is a boutique consulting firm that's had success hiring ex-CEOs, ex-company presidents. Um, in that particular case, it's a rainmaker job. So you can walk away from bureaucracy, you can walk away from the day-to-day responsibility of people and problems and take on an individual contributor role. And this is a company that sells in the industrial market and to private equity. And so anyone that has been carrying a P&L, managing a P&L, and certainly has an industrial focus and has done business development at some point in their career. And they're, again, with the help of someone doing lead generation, can introduce themselves to companies and find out what their problems are in the areas of, operational improvement or leadership or, global sourcing, any of the various challenges that companies have. And they would be, essentially representing that consulting firm, selling projects in the value of $1 to say $4 million generally. And they get a very large percentage of that deal once it's closed.
Mhm.
And, people in those roles make over $1 million a year. Those are
Mhm.
very difficult or challenging jobs to find. You have to be in the right, say, headspace or the right time frame and ready to do that. You have to be able to travel a lot. You have to be remote. You pretty much have to be extremely confident. You have to be great at meetings. Um, and of course, you have to speak to profitability and you have to speak to productivity. And you'll find that a lot of CEOs are also siloed because they've only worked in one industry or only worked in, say, a particular segment of, say, the chemicals industry or something like that. You know, they might know materials, but they've not had a broad exposure to a lot of things. But I think when you come in from an industrials type company and you've been in a leadership role and you have perhaps had several roles over your career where you've taken, say, an industrial engineering focus, built a business career on top of that, and have reached that point now where you want to leverage your network, these are the kinds of roles that are very fulfilling, but also very rewarding as well.
Mhm. Perfect. Perfect. And let's say we have a listener or a few listeners today that think that they're a great fit for that. You know, what's the best way for them to reach you? Would that be via LinkedIn or through the website, or what would you prefer?
They could get me through LinkedIn. They can directly email me, jim@galaxymgt.com. And you know, my advice, I want to just kind of go back to one of the other things I said before. My advice, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a, you know, that analyst looking for their first job change, you know, they got to lean into what they're doing. They've got to, you know, basically take those strengths that they've acquired and walk into the marketplace as a problem solver and find those companies out there that have what I say is big problems. Because when you find a company that has big problems, they're going to have a really big opportunity for you if you can solve those problems. And I've said this repeatedly on phone calls, and I know we've talked about this before, but whenever someone is having a really hard time putting words behind what it is they're trying to accomplish, I try to get them to focus on the fact that they're looking to go to an organization that has great people, that has learning opportunities, and has people in place that feel valued. So there's a good probability that you're going to feel valued if you go work there. And so having that mindset, whether they're a junior person, a mid-level person, or a senior person, lean into what you're doing, bring those skill sets to the table, try to find like-minded people that you can really be excited about coming to work and solve problems with. And things tend to work out really, really well. And that's pretty much the message I go with.
I love it. Thank you so much, Jim. We love having you on as a guest. Thank you for taking time. I know the audience is going to be very grateful for all the insights you've given, and hopefully we can have you on again soon.
All right. Really appreciate the time. Great talking to you. All right.
Yeah, thank you.